All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rise Zion. My name is Seth, and I hope you're all having a fantastic day. We're back in our virtual studio with Ryan Shanahan, the author of The Saints Who Built America. It's a fantastic book. I'll include a link to it here in the description of the video so you can check it out. But in it, he really loves to talk about how the Latter-day Saints have had a disproportionate impact on the world and on the United States and the history of the world and the history of the United States. And it's really, really fascinating. As we've been discussing on the channel recently, the fulfillment of prophecy in terms of the last days. And it's my belief, Ryan, that Latter-day Saints have the ability and have the power to change the way that prophecy is fulfilled. And I hope that that's the case. Some prophecies we might not be able to change. It might just be set the way it is. But for example, especially in terms of the prophecies concerning wars and rumors of wars, and particularly the war, the great wars that are supposed to culminate in the end of all nations. It's my belief that the Latter-day Saints have the ability to convince the nations of the world to perhaps give up power willingly to Jesus Christ when he comes again at his second coming. Or perhaps that can end in violence. I think there's two different ways that this prophecy can be fulfilled. But Ryan has some very fascinating stories that he's going to share with us today. It actually has to do with Latter-day Saints who made a disproportionate impact when we were fighting one of the major wars, World War II. So, Ryan, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about these stories?
Well, it'd be my pleasure to. Thanks for having me on again, Seth. I agree with you that many of these prophecies, they're warnings, and therefore they can possibly be changed depending on how people react and how they. Repentance is such a powerful tool, and we see this with the people of Nineveh in the Old Testament, right? We had Jonah. Didn't want to go to Nineveh for a very good reason. He turned back, but the Lord said, no, this has got to happen. You got to go. He went, he preached, and they changed. And all of his warnings didn't come true. Why didn't they come true? Because the people changed.
That's right.
And so we
that's
can
what
see
I was
that
thinking
it's possible.
That's the exact story that I was thinking of when I was saying that. But yeah, it's a good example.
Well, in that vein, the Lord is always doing work amongst his people, those who have his spirit, those who are influenced by him. He's working through them and others in various ways. Now, we often point to the new scriptures that have come about, new prophecies, the organization of the church itself as this establishment of a marvelous work and a wonder in preparation for the second coming of Jesus Christ. I would like to suggest that it's way bigger than just that. And there's way more going on. And we can see it in the everyday lives of Americans, for example, and how throughout the 20th century, the lifestyle of mankind has drastically changed. We have new innovations in technology, medicines. Diseases have been wiped out or are hardly affecting the most of the population these days. And to say that the Latter-day Saints have had a disproportionate impact given their small population amongst the U.S. population is, I think, the understatement of the year. I mean, we're playing a whole different ballgame than any of the other organizations on earth, the hundreds of different Christian organizations across this country and the thousands across the planet. It's not even close. And I think one of the ways we can point to this and say, see, this is an example of exactly what we're talking about, this marvelous work and wonder, is how the Latter-day Saints have contributed to some of the most horrifying events of world history in the last century, and that being World War II. Now, there are some really good resources out there for your audience who might want to look into this further. There's a great book series called Saints at War by Freeman and Wright. They have a fantastic book on the Second World War. They also have one on World War I. I believe they're working on one for the Korean War and Vietnam War as well. So those will be coming out in the future, but there's some really good resources out there. I suppose one of the places to begin would be to look at the general impact of World War II and how the LDS population was involved from the start. And one of the things I'd like to point out in that regard is at the time, in the 1940s, the LDS Church had grown to a global organization in a substantial way, where the three countries with the largest amount of LDS members were America, Canada, and Germany.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It was like setting something up, it seems like, right?
Yeah. Now, of course, the Germans actually took an interest in the church somewhat because of their work in genealogy. So they were going after people, and the church was not cooperating with them, although they were able to get their hands on some records and to utilize them. In other ways, members of the LDS Church in Germany were often force conscripted into the German army. And we have some stories about that, and even stories written in that book, Saints at War. I believe actually there's another account. There's a movie. Some of you might have seen it, Saints and Soldiers. This was produced some time ago, but it has some interesting details, true stories of Latter-day Saints in World War II as well. And one of those stories, just in brief, is about a U.S. soldier who was a Latter-day Saint who met a German who he had captured. And he was also a Latter-day Saint. He was a young Latter-day Saint, 16 or 17 years old, who was forced to fight. He threw down his weapon as soon as he saw the American soldiers and ran away. And this U.S. Latter-day Saint soldier fired at him, thinking, okay, he's a threat. He knows our position. We need to take him out. And he's an expert marksman. Fires several times, can't hit anything. And then he's later picked up by another team of U.S. soldiers coming up the road. And they found this young German Latter-day Saint praying. And later in the interrogation, they asked, what were you praying about? And he says, I was just thanking Heavenly Father that I wasn't shot while running down the road. That's just an anecdotal story about some of those interactions where we actually do have Latter-day Saints meeting each other on the battlefield. There's another interesting note I should make here, and it involves some original research I did on the subject. There was about 100,000 Latter-day Saints who participated in World War II.
Wow, 100,000.
Now, out of those, 5 of them were awarded the Medal of Honor. And all of their stories are fantastic. They're amazing, sad, harrowing, but they're very, very rich stories and rightly earned the Medal of Honor. But what's interesting is that over the course of the war, and there were over 12 million U.S. soldiers in World War II, adjusted for population and the number of Medal of Honors given out generally to the rest of the population who were not Latter-day Saints, we find that Latter-day Saints were honored as such 137 times as frequently as the rest of the population.
Wow, that's a huge number, 137 times more. Because we're just such a small little group of people compared to everybody else, but then we just have like this disproportionate impact for whatever reason, right? Well, I think we know, but
exactly.
It's very interesting, very fascinating. Wow.
Okay, so that gives you some background on World War II in general. Now I'd like to get into one of my favorite stories. And I think it's a story that is not known enough. And many of you may know this story. It's about Helmuth Hübener. And if you know the story, great. But it's one of those stories that is so significant and so rich. It's just not talked about enough. And it's one of the reasons I think it's so valuable, and it's why it's so near and dear to me. When I was writing this part of the book, this part was very hard for me to get through. Just reading about Hübner's life and what he did was very difficult for me. But I'm going to try to get through it today.
Okay. That sounds good.
Okay. A little background on Hübener. He grew up in Germany as a Latter-day Saints. His mother converted, and she raised her son in the church. She eventually remarried and wasn't able to continue attending church, but Hübener, her son, was able to continue with his grandmother. And he participated in the Boy Scouts. And later, as the Nazi Party began to take control, things changed, and he had to drop out of the Scouts and was forced to go into Hitler's youth group. But all of this time, he maintained his activity in the church, and he became an assistant clerk. And this allowed him to keep a typewriter in his home. So I'll go into the story a little bit here. I'll just start reading for you directly from chapter 8 in the book.
Okay.
At 16, Hübener began listening to German BBC radio stations reporting on the war and the state of Germany. This was outlawed by the state, but the reports proved that what German citizens were being told was not the whole truth. This motivated the youth saint to begin an education campaign in his community. He found like-minded individuals to help him, and they in turn began to embark on a dangerous task. Now, he actually enlisted the help of 3 of his friends from church, so 3 others who were also Latter-day Saints, who helped him with this campaign. What they did is they put together notes, little pamphlets. They used carbon paper and this typewriter to create a bunch of pamphlets that they would spread around town in secret. And they would write it in different languages. They got help from people to translate into French, for example. The boys' objective was to correct lies being propagated by the National Socialist War March reports and news broadcasts. And in the winter of 1941, Hübener and his friends foresaw the military defeat of Germany and decided that it was not enough to scatter leaflets calling on people to struggle against the National Socialist regime. They wanted to inform people how serious the situation was. Hübener developed ideas for more than 20 leaflets over the next 6 months. His messages, they read, as an example of one of them, "Make a decision. A decisive action can still save your people and country from the precipice to which Hitler has led it with his soothing words. Decide before it is too late." Hübener also took aim directly at Hitler, stating, "The Führer will send you by the thousands into the fires in order to finish the crime he started." Very strong words, right?
Yeah.
He says, continues, "By the thousand, your wives and children will become widows and orphans, and for nothing." So very strong words. Looking to expand their reach, in January of 1942, Hübener, accompanied by Dewar, one of his friends, asked an acquaintance to translate the leaflets into French. The boys were seen in the act, and informants turned them into the Gestapo. All 4 were arrested on February 5th of 1942. They would spend the next several months being interrogated, along with fellow saints from their church branch, the largest branch in Germany, actually, at the time. And they were subject to beatings, starvation, and given no bedding to rest on in their cell, so just a concrete cell. Charges included various crimes under Nazi law, conspiracy to commit high treason, and of course, treasonous acts were high priorities for the three-member Special People's Court in Berlin. This is sometimes referred to as the blood tribunals, with the judges draped in these blood red robes. This court was infamous for a 90% conviction rate that resulted in the death penalty or hard labor, which was often understood to be a slow death sentence. If a defendant were to attempt to speak in the courts would actually shout them down, and lawyers would often offer no defense or any words on their behalf. To give you some view of the reality that they faced, and that so many faced, a 90% conviction rate. That's over many, many trials.
Interesting. It's just like a fake kangaroo court, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. Hübener and his friend's trial would last approximately 9 hours, upon which all 4 were found guilty. Hübener, now 17 years old, was sentenced to death, while Wabe, Schneebe, and Dewar and I apologize on pronunciation if I don't have that right. They were sentenced to up to 10 years in labor camps, which was, of course, a slow death penalty that they understood. However, these three would survive to see the end of the war and go on to write of their experience and of their friend Helmuth Hübener. Both Wabe and Schnibe recalled that Hübener, barely 17, without, this is quote, barely 17, without any social standing or military rank, shouted back at President Judge Otto George Thierack. He says, "You have sentenced me to death for telling the truth. My time is now, but your time will come." According to Minert, a historian, both Wabe and Schnibe believed that Hübener had been particularly bold in court in an attempt to absorb the majority of the guilt and thus draw attention away from his friends. They had agreed in advance that if caught, they would do their best to shoulder the guilt individually and thus attempt to avoid burdening others with the guilt. The actions taken by Hübener echo the sentiments that his faith was built on. From the Gospel of John 15:13, Jesus Christ taught, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." Hübener would be doing no less, not only for his friends, but for his country and, of course, also for the peace of the world. As the day of execution drew near, Hübener wrote several letters to family and friends, and only one of them survives today. He says, "I am very grateful to my Heavenly Father that my miserable life will come to an end tonight. I could not bear it any longer anyway. My Father in heaven knows that I have done nothing wrong. I know that God lives, and he will be the just judge in this matter. I look forward to seeing you in a better world. Your friend and brother in the gospel, Helmuth." His last words. Hübener was put to death by guillotine on October 27th, 1942. Author Alan Keel once demonstrated the horror of the all too common brutality of the Second World War and its effect on people all over the world by this statement. He says, quote, "Out of the silent intellectual German landscape, one faint, persistent query began to go up. Why? Why? Why?" He says, "Seldom before has that question been asked by so many, of so many, for so many years." As we approach a century since World War II, Helmuth Hübener has been remembered for his resistance to the Nazi regime. Memorial exhibits have been installed at a vocational school in Hamburg, at the German Resistance Memorial in Berlin, and at Plötzensee prison, where the execution took place. Additionally, a youth center, a school, and 2 streets in Hamburg bear his name. Since the 1940s, political, social, and religious groups have held various celebrations on January 8th, Hübener's birthday, and October 27th, his execution date, commemorating his heroism. On January 8th, 2020, a school at a juvenile detention center near Plötzensee prison was named in Hübener's honor, and students at Hamburg's administrative school now study the young man's life as a lesson in fundamental values, the values of a young Latter-day Saint. Hübener's actions may not have affected the war, helped the Allies, or changed anything about the United States. Most citizens have probably never heard his name, but for those who do know his story, Hübener remains an inspiration. He and his friends taught us to not allow injustice to go unchecked and to have courage to stand for truth in the face of extreme cruelty. Notably, Hübener's enlightened response to an unjust war was not violence, nor was he apathetic as others had been. Instead, he and his like-minded friends engaged in peaceful education. By circulating information from BBC broadcasts, these 4 young Latter-day Saints took it upon themselves to change society by legitimate and moral means, even if that meant incurring the punishment of a shameless, brutal government. Hübener's life is an example of youthful heroism. He reminds us that many of our nation's heroes did their great deeds while in their youth, Many of America's founding fathers were ages 18 to 30. Many great athletes achieve gold medals while in their teens and 20s. And even great scientists have often become known while relatively young. And that is to say, the millions who answered the call of the war drum were mostly young and inexperienced soldiers. And each did what they could in a large effort to change the world. And I'll leave that with you.
It's amazing. I love that story. And so a part of the reason why I love it so much is because it just seems to me like there's this effort by some, not all, but by some who seem determined to take any horrible crime that is committed by a Latter-day Saint, for example, and then take that and make it an judgment against the entire religion. It's because that they were Latter-day Saints that they did these horrible things. And we see this most commonly. We don't know what's going to be coming down the line here with the Charlie Kirk assassination that just took place. But we've seen what has happened with the Chad Daybell case, for example. We've seen what's happened with just various other crimes that have occurred. You know, they happen every once in a while here in Utah too. But it's very remarkable how some people just want to make it about the faith. They say it's not in spite of the faith, it's because of the faith. And I wonder how many of those same people would turn to this story and look at that and say, this story of this brave young man is because of his faith, not in spite of it. That's what I
Right. Very good point. Is there any questions you have specifically about it I could maybe go into further?
That's a wonderful story.
It's a pretty good wrap up. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder. It is very pertinent to what's going on today, which is fantastic. And I hope
so.
that we pray. I love how you pointed out that it almost seems prophetic because you wrote those words a while ago, but it seems prophetic that this young Latter-day Saint was appropriately protesting against the government in ways that are non-violent and using the power of the pen, using the power of ideas, and speaking truth to power in this way. So I think that's particularly powerful.
Yeah. Hübener wasn't allowed to go out in public and be able to share his message, to have conversations with people and speak to people like Charlie Kirk was. But here in this country, we do have that freedom, and Kirk was making that happen, having those conversations, educating people as Hübener was. Both were educated for largely the same reasons. There was a certain group of people who didn't like the message that they were sharing. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that. I definitely appreciate that story. I think it's very self-explanatory, you guys, and I love it. I love that story. It's just so perfect for what's going on right now. Well, you guys, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we end this? That's fantastic. Great. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe before you head out. Make sure to check out Ryan's book, and make sure to check out Ryan's channel too. Remind us of your channel name again. It's the
All About Your Faith.
All About Your Faith. That's right.
Yeah, now, I appreciate that.
It's absolutely fantastic, you guys. Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll talk to you next time. All right, bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.